What's up, everyone? It's David. I just got to the parking lot of my apartment complex, and I figured I would just record this video right now before I even step in the door of my apartment. Because when I step in the door, I'm going to want to just take my shoes off, relax, maybe even fall asleep since I'm running on so little sleep right now. So I figured I would just record this video in the car, briefly summarizing what we talked about today with the Indochina Wars, right? So the wars in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So to start off the story, right, we have what we'll refer to as Indochina, which is modern day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and we'll start our story with French colonization of this area, right? So these places, they were obviously not always called French Indochina. You have these different kingdoms in modern day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, minding their own business in the mid 1800s, and then the French start showing up and start colonizing. So basically, by the end of the 1800s, France has colonized this area, again, modern day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and they've called it French Indochina. So in doing this, they do awful stuff, as colonizers often do, and they retain hold of the area actually until World War II, really. We didn't really talk about it in lecture today, but when France falls to the Nazis and then Japan in Asia starts taking over other parts of Asia, they actually take over French Indochina, essentially, from 1941 to 1945. And then 1945, the Axis is defeated. France tries to reassert control over the colonies that it previously had, right? And so in doing so, then, in both French Indochina and other places like North Africa with Algeria, it does so through choosing warfare with the local population. Because, of course, the local population, they helped in the fight against the Axis powers, proved themselves, and so, wanted to assert their independence. So in modern day Vietnam now, this is where you have Ho Chi Minh come in, form the Vietnam as a Marxist independence organization for the Vietnamese, right? So in talking about the Viet Minh, the Viet Minh, like I just said, were Marxists, but Ho Chi Minh himself, pretty practical, pretty worldly guy, not super rigid, not super orthodox when it came to how stringently he enforced that ideology. So it is a Marxist group. But it's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more open-minded. If you actually read the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence that he puts out, it actually even uses some language of the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the French Declaration of Universal Values, or whatever that document is from the French Revolution. Anyways, so the French tried to reassert control in Vietnam, right? And so this is what the First Indochina War is. It is Vietnam and the rest of Indochina fighting for independence against the French. The French do not want to give up their territories, so that's why you have this war drag out as long as it does, and so it lasts until 1954, when, through the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the Viet Minh and other independence forces, but especially the Viet Minh, are able to beat the French. So you have then, after the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, after the end of this First Indochina War between France and China, you have the Geneva Convention, which, among other things, divides Vietnam along the 17th parallel, right? So North Vietnam goes to the Viet Minh, to the Vietnamese independence fighters, the communists, and then the South becomes essentially a U.S. satellite state. Now, you have this conference in 1954. There was an agreement that in 1956, Vietnam would be unified and there would be elections in order to, fully unite the country under one government. Problem was, for the U.S., they knew that if there were elections, the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh, right, the kind of head figure of the Viet Minh, would win because of their popularity in leading the independence movement. And so, with Southern Vietnam under Ngo Dinh Diem kind of being the U.S. puppet state, that's there to kind of enforce, Western capitalist interests. Basically, those 1956 elections, or the time when those elections should have happened, just kind of passed by, and there are no elections held, right? So you have then North Vietnam and South Vietnam, kind of like you see in the Koreas. Again, the North held by the Viet Minh, the South, the U.S.-backed puppet government under No Dien Diem. So that's essentially the beginning of the foundations of the U.S. role in Vietnam, but it would be escalated in 1964 because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. It's this long, kind of convoluted story. Basically, the U.S. is putting ships off the coast of Vietnam, and there's an incident one night where a U.S. ship believes it's being attacked in this Gulf of Tonkin. And so, there's kind of this uncertainty. And again, it's kind of a long, convoluted story, but ultimately, LBJ, rather than trying to, really kind of fully slow down and ascertain things when there's like these issues happening in the Gulf, he decides to use that to launch a full-scale invasion of Vietnam. So, you have then the U.S., in 1964, you have the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, right, to like increase U.S. presence in Vietnam. And then in 1965 is when it actually starts happening. So the Vietnam War, as we think about it, as the U.S., putting boots on the ground and like really having a full war effort, begins in 1965 and lasts until 1973. In lecture, Professor Peterson talked about things like the use of Agent Orange, the use of napalm to attack the people that were there. She talked about the My Lai massacre. I've heard it pronounced different ways. I don't know the right way to pronounce it, but it's either My Lai or My Lai. You have that massacre of civilians done by U.S. troops. A not so fun fact about that, by the way, the person who got in trouble immediately afterward, the person who got most in trouble for the My Lai massacre was, or I should say the U.S. soldier who got in trouble most for the My Lai massacre and its immediate aftermath, was actually someone who was not part of the unit that was slaughtering the Vietnamese civilians. It was actually a man named Hugh Thompson Jr., who was part of a different unit. He was part of a helicopter crew that just happened to be in the area as, the other unit was conducting the massacre. And his people hear the shots, they go to see like what's going on. They see that there's a gunfight going on, or they see that there's like shots being fired, that there's conflict. And so they go to investigate and possibly, see if they can help U.S. forces there. And then they see that it's Americans that are doing the killing. So Hugh Thompson and his crew, they actually touched down, to prevent the American soldiers from firing on more Vietnamese civilians, right? So they actually touched down to stop the massacre that's going on. And eventually, they are able to save a number of Vietnamese people who would have otherwise been killed. But Hugh Thompson, the guy who was in charge of that helicopter crew, he actually receives death threats for stopping this massacre. He receives just a lot of hate in general, and they attempt to court-martial him in the immediate aftermath of everything. So that's the person who they actually try to punish at first. Anyways, you have things like that. So you have the Vietnam War lasting until 1973, but with some asterisks really near that, right? Because the U.S. kind of is still involved in some other ways. It's not until 1975 that the U.S. entire military presence pulls out. And as we talked about in class, that is when South Vietnam falls, because that government just didn't have any popular legitimate basis behind it. As all of this stuff is going on, you have the wars in Laos and Cambodia. And it's kind of a similar thing where the U.S. is trying to stop the spread of communism there. But they're mostly doing so through bombing campaigns, rather than fully putting boots on the ground and starting a full war the way they did in Vietnam, right? Another not so fun fact, Laos is the country in all of human history that has been bombed the most per capita, again, in all of human history, right? And so that's happening during this so-called secret war that's going on in Laos. So, you have that struggle in Laos and Cambodia as well. And what ends up happening in Cambodia is that, you have the ascent to power of the Khmer Rouge, right, who carry out the Cambodian genocide. This one is actually kind of a fun fact. The people that would end up stopping the Cambodian communists from carrying out this genocide are the Vietnamese communists, led by the Viet Minh, right? And just, Vietnam as a whole now, because it is united by the time they invaded Cambodia and they put a stop to the genocide. So Um, that's a little bit of an overview. I hope that was helpful. Um, the fun facts that I mentioned, by the way, or the not so fun facts that I mentioned, those are things you obviously don't have to remember. Those are just kind of bonus bits of information that you can just have with you. I hope this was helpful. Yeah, have a great day, everyone.